Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections, along with the daily mains answer writing program. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to redefining a very important aspect of India's foreign policy, that is strategic autonomy, the associated challenges, and the way forward. Then in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the increasing instances of fire accidents in the country, the factors responsible, and the way forward. Then in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2026 along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to redefining India's strategic autonomy. Former US Secretary of State Mr. Henry Kissinger once said that in international relations, there are no permanent friends or enemies. Only interests are permanent. And this US has been following for many years. Where this particular dictum is most evident in India's foreign policy architecture, it is most evident in its principle of strategic autonomy, where what we say is that our actions, our interactions with the other countries, they are based on our own national interests. They are not constrained, they are not restricted by the stance or stand taken by the other countries. And this has been many times even said by our External Affairs Minister, who has said that for India, its national interest is supreme. Why this topic becomes of extreme importance is because of the recent state visit by the Russian President, Mr. Putin. Now, this has been the very first visit to India after the 2022, Russia's aggression, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and also considering that the International Criminal Court has issued a warrant against Mr. Putin. Now, what you'll have to understand is that we have very close partnerships with Russia. At the same time, we also have very good relations with the Western countries. But understand that Russia and the West, they are inimical to each other. They are antagonistic to each other. So it's not easy to balance the relations. Therefore, what the column is arguing is that we'll have to engage with both Russia as well as the West. We cannot be like a pendulum moving to and fro from one block to the other. We'll have to engage proactively with both these two aspects. So what we'll do today is we'll see what this particular approach of strategic autonomy is all about. We'll see what is the context of the world order. We'll also look at how this aspect of strategic autonomy has evolved over the years. What are the challenges which are posed to the aspects of strategic autonomy and what should be the way forward. Very important component of GS2, international relations. Now, let's see that what do we mean by strategic autonomy. As I told you, that it is the ability of a nation state to pursue its own national interests and its own preferred foreign policy choices without being constrained by the stance or stand taken by the other countries. So it's a kind of a pragmatic realist approach. Pragmatic realist approach. That is what you'll have to understand. Use these words in your answers. Now, what is the primary reasons that we are so attached to this concept of strategic autonomy? Because many of the commentators, international affairs experts, and in fact, we had the ambassador, the US ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, who said that this is a fake concept, strategic autonomy. It doesn't exist in reality. But why do Indians, and especially the foreign policy makers, Indian foreign policy makers, they're so attached to this particular concept of strategic autonomy? See, the primary reason is that we were ruled by the Britishers and they exploited India in the very extent possible. Our choices were shaped by the interest of the Britishers. So, during the pre-independence time and even post-independence, the national leaders decided that we will make sure that our choices are based on our own national interests. We are not guided by others. So that is why we have given a lot of attachment to this aspect of strategic autonomy. One thing is very important to understand. It applies to 2 aspects. One is that of the territorial integrity, that we'll maintain the territorial integrity. Second is the aspect of sovereignty. Now, sovereignty includes both internal as well as external. Internal means that we are free to form and create our own laws and to enforce them. External means that we will take our own decisions with respect to the other countries. That is what you'll have to understand. Now, how this particular aspect of strategic autonomy has evolved. In order to understand that, you'll have to first understand the very important concept of world order. See, what do we mean by world order? First of all, it's a dynamic concept. It basically implies the at particular point of time, what is the distribution of power and authority among different countries and international institutions around the world. How the power and authority is distributed among different countries and international institutions. Now, since power and authority flows from one country or group of countries to the other, it is a dynamic concept. Look at this particular picture. You'll see that in the medieval times, we had the Dutch. On the basis of their own naval superiority, they basically colonized few parts of the world. Now, their position was taken by that of the Britishers, where Britishers colonized most of the world, including India. Now, post Second World War, what we saw was the rise of US, and the world became a unipolar structure where there was a complete dominance by the US in overall affairs. Then in 2001, two events happened. The one was the collapse of the World Trade Center, the attack on the World Trade Center. That marked a black spot on the hegemony of the US. And second, what you'll have to understand is the aggressive rise of China. China joined the World Trade Organization, and that too on the insistence of the US. So because of this, what we have been looking at is a picture that there has been a kind of the breakage of the unipolar world order. And now we have a kind of a multipolar world order where China is trying to gain the hegemony. It's trying to become the next hegemon. That is what you'll have to understand. Now, in this particular context of the world order, we'll see that how the strategic autonomy has evolved. Now, if you look at the very first phase, which started from 1947, after independence, till 1961, look at the kind of power and authority structure which we have as of now. The world is bipolar. One bloc led by the US, the Western democratic countries, and the other bloc led by the erstwhile USSR, communist nations. Now, what you'll have to understand is, at this point of time, India decided that we are not going to join any of these blocs. And that was best manifested in the non-aligned movement conference of 1961 in Belgrade. Before that, in 1955, we had the Bandung conference, also known as the Afro-Asian gathering, where India, along with the other countries, decided that we'll make sure that the aspects of colonialism and neo-colonialism are not forced on the newly independent countries. So that was very important step. Next thing which I'll have to understand is the aspects of Panchsheel policy. So Pandit Nehru, 1955, came up in a kind of an agreement with the Chinese, 5-point agreement, where we decided that we will follow a particular approach based upon mutual coexistence, non-aggression, non-interference in each other's matter. That is what Panchsheel is all about. Next aspect is that of preservation of autonomy. We made sure that our autonomy is preserved. Why? See, we already saw the tragedy of partition. So many people died. So the political leaders at that point of time, they decided that we cannot see a kind of a repetition of this situation. There cannot be any kind of secession of India. So we focused on the consolidation of the Indian territory. We made sure that the territory of India is consolidated, and therefore we gave importance to the aspects of autonomy. Then comes the second phase of realism. Why this aspect of realism came? Because of the unfortunate loss of India in the India's-Chinese War of 1962. India-Sino War of 1962. So then that was a kind of a time where some form of realism dawned. And the political leaders and the foreign policy experts, they said that India needs to be a bit realistic. And it was for that reason that in 1964, India came up in a defense partnership, a defense agreement with the US. That is what you'll have to understand. So we made pragmatic choices. Choices based upon the practical realities of international relations. Then we have the third phase. Third phase, that of the regional assertion, where India tried to assert itself regionally in the areas surrounding the country. And the manifestation was visible in the tilt towards the USSR. So it was in 1971 that we signed the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation. Again, understand, India did not become an ally of the USSR, but this was an agreement. But definitely it had a tilt towards the USSR. And primarily, why did we sign this? To have security guarantees, right? Then we saw the creation of Bangladesh with the help of India. And even in yesterday's newspaper, we had the Indian High Commissioner to Bangladesh, who has said that India recognized Bangladesh 10 days before its own creation. So we played one of the very important role in the creation of Bangladesh. Then we had the nuclear test of 1974. Why? Because it was in the year of 1964 that China became a nuclear state. It had its own project 546 and it became a nuclear state. So this was a kind of an existential threat for India, more so because China was aligning more with Pakistan. So therefore in 1974 we came up with the Operation Smiling Buddha, right? Very important nuclear test of 1974, and because of that many of the Western countries, primarily US, imposed sanctions on India. Then we had the peacekeeping operations from 1987 till 1990, primarily to control the LTT, Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, in the Jaffna area of Sri Lanka. So over there, that cannot be said that was a complete victory for India. But again, India intervened in its regions, in the area surrounding. Then we had the development of US-China-Pakistan axis. Why? Because India was basically coming closer to the USSR. And that made it very important for these three countries to come together. And this was a kind of a challenge for India's foreign policy, right? There was a kind of a triangular axis, development of triangular axis between US, China and Pakistan. Now, what was the fourth phase? The fourth phase was with respect to the 1991 inflection point. See, why this is really important to understand, the chronology to understand is not just for the sake of IR, but rather you will have a clear picture when we talk about the post-independent history, right? So it becomes very important. In 1990, India suffered balance of payment crisis. And that was in a way a kind of a blessing in disguise for India, where we had a kind of a compulsion by the country, especially by the US, that we need to basically open our own markets. And therefore, there was a kind of rapid liberalization. We integrated more with the global supply chain. We initiated the LPG reforms, liberalization, privatization, and globalization reforms. That was because of the BOP crisis, a lot of economic reforms took place. And we integrated ourselves more with the other countries around the world, specifically the US. Then we started the multi-alignment. Very important to understand. We not only interacted with the US when it comes to the science, technology, trade aspects, but rather our interactions with Russia also increased. Our interactions with the East Asian economies increased. Why? Because you'll have to understand that USSR disintegrated. And this was a kind of a blow to India. And therefore, India had to diversify its partners. And therefore, we started with the Look East approach under the Prime Ministership of P.V. Narasimha Rao, right? That is what you'll have to understand. Then we come with the fifth phase. Now, in this particular phase, what you'll have to understand, this can be seen as a kind of a growing partnership with that of the US, but also with the other countries. This phase starts in the year 2005, where we came up with a kind of a civil nuclear agreement with the US. Now, this provided India access to the global nuclear technologies, a very, very important step, right? And there was a shift from a P2 mindset. Because again, see, especially after the start of this particular millennia, after 2000, what we saw that India's interaction with all the countries increased. We did not just cater to a mindset of US and China, but rather we also started interaction with the other countries, be it the middle powers, right? And we started focusing upon the Indo-Pacific. Why? This is very important to understand. See, post Second World War, till this day, there has been a power transition. Power has shifted from the Atlantic to that of the Indo-Pacific. There has been a shift of power. You can say the shift with respect to the world order from Atlantic to that of the Indo-Pacific. And in the Indo-Pacific, what you'll have to understand is that Indian Ocean region is the most important. And in the Indian Ocean region, we have India as the most important geographical entity. So this naturally makes India very important. Also, what you'll have to understand is that it was in the year of 2011. Very important points of history to understand. That Barack Obama initiated the Asia pivot. What he said, US President Barack Obama, what he said, that we are going to shift our attention from the Middle East, which has been trapped in a lot of conflicts, to that of Asia. We'll focus more upon Asia because of, especially in the context of the aggressive rise of China. And therefore, what India has been also focusing upon, that we need to have a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. I hope it is clear. Then comes the next aspect of balancing diplomacy. Why this is important? We are not just interacting with countries like the US. We are also interacting with countries like Russia, which are inimical to each other. We are interacting with Israel when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to defense supplies. We are also interacting with Iran when it comes to the connectivity. So that is a kind of balancing diplomacy we have been following. And this is not an easy task. Please understand. This is very tough, right? Next aspect is that of de-hyphenation policy. Now, this primarily we talk in the context of Israel-Palestine issue. What it means is that we look at a particular country on its own merit. If we are looking and talking or interacting with Israel, we'll not talk about or bring in, definitely we'll bring in the Palestine issue, but we'll have an interaction with Israel on the basis of its own merit. Or when we'll have an interaction with the Palestinian authorities, we'll see the issue on its own merit. That we have also been practicing when we talk about the Israel-Iran aspect. We have been having the talks with respect to Israel, but also we have been communicating with the Iranian authorities. Then next most important aspect is that of issue-based cooperation. This has been of the most prominent aspect when we talk about post-2005, the fifth phase. Why? Because right now we are focusing upon the issue-based cooperation. Let's talk about the technology aspect. We are cooperating with different countries, primarily the US in the form of the ISET, Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology. Or when it comes to the Global South, issues with respect to the African countries or the Caribbean countries, we are interacting with Brazil, we are interacting with South Africa. Or when it comes to the technology aspect, we are interacting with the countries of Japan, we are interacting with South Korea. So that is what you'll have to understand. Or when it comes to the climate change, we are interacting with Brazil. So we are focusing upon issue-based cooperations, right? Then we have intensified cooperation with the middle powers. See, as the world has transitioned from a bipolar to that of a unipolar to that of a multipolar, we have increased our interactions with respect to the middle powers. For example, Japan, Germany, South Korea. Why this is important? Because there are technological hubs. They have huge technological power. And therefore, we have been interacting with these countries. Let's take, for example, the automobile manufacturers. We have Japanese automobile manufacturers in the form of Toyota or Honda who have significantly invested in India. Or let's talk about the South Korean automobile manufacturers in the form of Hyundai. Or we have Kia. Or let's talk about the German automobile manufacturers in the form of BMW, or in the form of Volkswagen or Mercedes, right? So they have been investing substantially in India. And that is one of the reasons that we have interacted more with these middle powers. Then critical defense deal, very, very important. We have come with critical defense deal with many of these countries. In the year 2016, US declared India as a major defense partner. And we have signed 4 foundational agreements with the US in the form of LEMOA, Logistic Exchange Memorandum of Understanding. Then we have the COMCASA, Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement. Then we had GSOMIA, General Security on Military Industrial Agreement. Then we had BECA, Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement. And recently we also had SOSA, Security of Supply Agreement. So what it shows is that India has had very close ties with respect to the US when we talk about the defense aspect. We have been buying a lot of critical defense platforms in the form of C-17, Globemaster. Or let's talk about C-130J, Super Hercules. Or let's talk about the attack helicopters, Apache attack helicopters. Now this is with respect to the US. On the other hand, we have been interacting with the Russia. When we talk about the defense aspect, we have bought the S-400 Triumph missile system, defense system. Or let's talk about the MiG aircrafts. So we have had interacted with these different countries who are inimical to each other. We have bought defense platforms from Israel's, right? That is what you'll have to understand. Next aspect is that of 2+2 dialogue. Very important component. We have made sure that the security aspect and the foreign affairs aspect are integrated, are talked at the same table. So we have the 2+2 dialogue where the foreign affairs minister, right, the Minister for External Affairs and the Defense Minister of India, they have basically interacted with their counterparts of different countries, be it the US, Japan, Australia, UK, right, Russia. So that is what the kind of prospects we have been looking at when we talk about the security arrangement. Then we have military logistics agreement. As I told you, we have LEMOA with the US. We have come with RELOS with Russia. When we talk about the logistics agreement, making sure that we provide mutual logistics facilities to each other in times of need. We have come with these logistics agreements with the countries like France and Singapore. Then we have pulling out of RCEP. Very important to understand. See, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This was a kind of a China-led initiative, a free trade agreement. And India did not basically become a part of this, primarily because we had to secure the interests of our domestic manufacturers and farmers. But other reason was that this was a China-led initiative, and therefore we did not participate. Instead, we have come on US has basically initiated the Indo-Pacific framework on prosperity. So Indo-Pacific economic framework on prosperity. Now this is not a free trade agreement, what you'll have to understand, but it has some of the aspects with respect to facilitation of the trade, with respect to the investments aspect, right? Then we have basically converted or transitioned the aspects of Look East to that of the Act East, where we have been interacting greatly with the East Asian economies. Just imagine, it was in the year 1992, the kind of trade we had with the Asian that amounted to almost $2 billion. And this has increased to more than 72 billion US dollars in the year 2017-18. So that is a kind of prospect. That is a kind of enhancement we have seen in the relations. Next, we have use of hard power. So when we talk about strategic autonomy, what it also means is that it is not just about having partnership with the other countries, but rather showcasing its power in the times of need. Let's talk about 2015, as cases of where we started the surgical strikes across the border in Myanmar, or the Balakot strike, or the recent Operation Sindoor. That manifests that India basically, in a very specific manner, retaliated when it comes to the security aspect. So that is also showcasing India's hard power, expanding the soft power. Let's talk about the International Yoga Day. Let's talk about the South Asian satellite. So that these things highlight India's or the intangible cultural heritage we have that showcases India's soft power. And we have been expanding that. Again, we have made sure that there is centrality of the Indo-Pacific whenever we talk about the aspects of foreign policy. We make sure that Indo-Pacific is free, open, and inclusive. And that itself gives edge to India because it is the prime country in the Indian Ocean region. That is how the strategic autonomy has evolved. What are the challenges in this particular aspect? The very first is energy security. Why? See, when we talk about the crude oil supplies, India is dependent to the tune of more than 85% on different countries with respect to the import of crude oil. Now, again, understand, this basically gives these countries who are supplying oil to India a geopolitical leverage. They can manipulate at different times. What US has been doing, US has basically compelled India to lower down its supplies from Russia. It has imposed a lot of sanctions. That is a kind of manipulation which these countries do. And India has been increasing its supplies of oil with respect to the US. And it's not just with respect to the oil. Let's talk about the coking coal, which is very important when we talk about the manufacturing of steel. India has been importing. It's import dependent on countries like Australia with respect to the aspects of steel, manufacturing steel. So this is a grave threat. It basically in one way or the other challenges the aspect of strategic autonomy. Then we have trade structure and China-linked supply chain. Very important to understand. Strategic autonomy cannot be realized, or it's very difficult to realize when the power relations are very asymmetric. See, especially when we talk about the trade structure, what you'll have to understand, India is having a trade deficit, a very big trade deficit with respect to China, to the tune of more than 100 billion US dollars. Now, this is not something which gives India a kind of an advantage. It rather makes it weak. More so, what you'll have to understand is that the supply chains across the world, they are dominated by the Chinese. You talk about the active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, or you talk about the electronics or electrical equipments, or you talk about the critical minerals, or you talk about the hardwares. Countries are critically dependent on China. And in this particular picture, you cannot basically exercise strategic autonomy in complete sense. That is what a challenge is. Next aspect is that of defense autonomy. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, what it says is India, though it has basically taken a lot of steps when we talk about defense indigenization, but still we are critically dependent on defense supplies, primarily from Russia. Its share has been decreasing, but we are critically dependent on the components. We are dependent upon the Israeli components, on the US supplies. So how can you say that we are strategically autonomous if we are still critically dependent on these defense platforms? Then we have technology and critical inputs. See, let's talk about artificial intelligence. Very important to understand. The very basis of artificial intelligence is the development of language models. Where do you find the development of language models as of now? It's primarily in the countries like US and China. India is taking steps. I'm not denying that. But most of the development which is taking place with respect to the artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, artificial neural networks, quantum computing. It's taking place in countries like US or China, or in some countries of EU, or even nuclear process, right? So understand, this gives India a kind of a weak position. Definitely we are trying to improve upon that aspect, but still we are dependent. Next, we have critical inputs. Let's talk about the critical minerals. More than 80% of the production of the critical minerals like cobalt, lithium, chromium, which are essential component of battery storage systems or renewable energy technologies, RETs, they are basically in China. More than 80% of the total production, and more than 90, almost 90% of the processing abilities is with respect to China. So again, this is a very skewed picture. We are critically dependent. If India is investing a lot in the renewable energy, we'll have to make sure that we diversify that from where we are getting these inputs, right? Then we have perception of weakness. See, if a country has to become great, it has to take decisions. But what we have been observing in the last few decades is that whenever it came to important decisions, India has taken a kind of an ambivalent approach, ambiguous approach. It has either abstained from taking a decision. You talk about the Israel-Palestine issue, or the, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It has not taken a specific, a kind of a decision. And this has been criticized by a lot of the European scholars or the American scholars. It is a kind of sitting on the fence approach, where you are not taking the decisions. And this is a kind of a perception of weakness. If you have to really become Vishwaguru, you'll have to take decisions. That is what many commentators have been saying. Then we have fear of becoming a US ally. Times and again, US has narrowed India's choices. Let's talk about the sanctions which US basically put on the connectivity projects with respect to Iran, the Chabahar port. So it narrowed the choices for India. Second, recently what it has done, we were basically buying Russian oil. It basically imposed tariff on us. So it has narrowed the choices. What options do India has now? To interact more with the Western countries or US. So therefore, it is in a way making India dependent on the US or the Western countries. It is narrowing down the choices, right? So this is not a manifestation of strategic autonomy. Then we have assertive rise of China. See, you cannot deny the fact that China is a real power. You talk about the military aspect, the diplomacy aspect, the economic aspect. It's a regional power, a very dominating player. And we share a land border with China. We already saw what happened in Galwan and the other crisis, Doklam crisis. So we'll have to make sure that we have at least that kind of relation with China, which does not antagonize China. And for that, we'll have to basically have some form of relations with the Chinese authorities. And that can compromise the strategic autonomy. Then we have assertion of power. We have been, what we talk about, India talks about, is the policy of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, or Mahasagar. Mahasagar, mutual and holistic advancement for security and growth for all in the region. Now, this in one way, what India is trying to say is that we are the net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. If you are saying that you are the net security provider, you'll have to sometimes showcase your power. And then that can antagonize China, because China is critically dependent on the Malacca Strait. And if India tries to do anything in this particular region, it can antagonize China. That's what you'll have to understand. Then we have domestic capability bottlenecks. Still to this day, we have been investing. We have come with different schemes like PLI, production linked incentives, in order to basically boost the manufacturing. But still, we are critically dependent on the other countries with respect to the value added goods. We are not having the kind of indigenous base when we talk about the manufacturing ability, when we talk about the critical minerals processing, when we talk about the electronics manufacturing. We are still dependent, and that is something which we'll have to work upon, and that basically weakens the aspect of strategic autonomy. What should be the way forward? The very first is we need to have a multi-vector foreign policy approach. We cannot just, as the article says, we cannot move like a pendulum to and fro from one country to that of the other. We need to engage proactively, issue-based, interest-based collaborations, not identity-based. Keeping in mind that we also give importance to the values which we have been adhering to. For example, Panchsheel, right? So we'll have to make sure that the international rule of law, the order is protected, but at the same time, we'll come up with the interest-based coalitions, partnerships. Securing the energy inputs is again very, very important. For that, we'll have to diversify the sources. We cannot be just critically dependent on the Middle Eastern countries. We'll have to diversify the sources, be it the Latin American countries, or we have come up with the strategic petroleum reserves, SPRs. We need to enhance that, right? Next, we have also the same thing goes with the coal. Next, we have reducing the single point dependencies. Here we are talking about two things. First is defense. Second, we are talking about the critical minerals. We cannot be critically dependent on any one particular country with respect to the defense inputs. So we'll have to diversify. India has been doing it. We have been diversifying with respect to the US, Israel and other countries. And we also have been investing a lot in the defense indigenization. Second is with respect to critical minerals. Why only be dependent upon China? We have critical minerals in some of the other countries. We have the lithium triangle. Tell me the name of the countries which form the lithium triangle. We have different entities like ONGC. They can invest substantially and not just, see again, we cannot just go with an approach where we are just exploiting their resources. Let's have a kind of an approach where there is a coexistence, where we are co-partnering in the aspects of processing and development of those critical minerals with respect to these countries in Latin America or Australia, right? Next aspect is that of diversifying the markets and upgrading the competitiveness. Very, very important. We need to diversify the markets with respect to our commodities. And for that, we'll have to make sure that the standards of our products, which we are producing in India, they match to the requirements of the other countries, be it the European Union or the other countries. And therefore, we'll have to enhance, significantly invest in the quality aspect. Next is upgrading the competitiveness. How we can do so? We can do so as the government has already come up with the labor reforms, or what we can invest more so in that of the skill enhancement. Need to create a more robust skill base, especially in the context of emerging technologies. That is very important to understand. So that is how we enhance our competitiveness, right? And our manufacturing base. Next, we have Russia as a lever. See, again, we cannot just be trapped in a kind of a situation where we always say that we have Russia. Enhance cooperation with Russia, especially in those areas which are not basically under the lens of the sanctions. For example, recently we have come up with labor agreements with Russia. So enhance in those areas where we can have more productive relations, but at the same time enhance the cooperation also with the Western countries. Why this is important? We have countries in the EU, we have US, who are the great sources of investments. They can significantly invest in India. So that is what you'll have to understand. Next, we have creative diplomacy and flexibility. See, in the current state of international relations, it is very important to have strong diplomatic power. We have countries like US and China who have significantly invested in their diplomacy. Their diplomats, they're posted almost in every corner of the world. So we'll have to significantly invest in the diplomatic aspects, in the training, so that we can have our own diplomatic maneuvering, right? Cooperate and compete. We'll have to cooperate with different countries, and at the same time, we should also compete in order to make sure that we have our own base in different technologies, where economically, militarily, and diplomatically, we have our own base. Next, we have active engagement with middle powers, because they are the technological hubs. Be it Germany, be it South Korea, be it Japan. We need to interact more. They are also the source of one of the greatest investments. So that should be also kept in mind. Utilizing the multilateral institutions. For example, in the form of G20 or BRICS, where we can emerge as the voice of the global south. We already did that in the 2023 G20 summit, where we incorporated African Union as a member of the G20. So we need to basically make these institutions more important by basically giving life to these institutions, making sure that there is proper engagement in these institutions. See, what you'll have to understand is this is a very important core element of India's foreign policy, strategic autonomy, but it cannot be just on paper. We'll have to make sure that we significantly invest in our own military aspects, in our own capabilities with respect to the manufacturing aspects, and that would give a boost to the economic sphere, and also the diplomacy aspect, because that is a very important thing to understand, right? So this is again a very important topic in order to realize the vision of Viksit Bharat by 2047. And in order to realize this particular aspect of strategic autonomy in true sense, we'll have to significantly invest in these three spheres of military, economy, and the aspects of diplomacy. Let's have a mains practice question. In an increasing polarized global order, India's pursuit of strategic autonomy has undergone significant evolution. In the light of this statement, discuss the challenges faced by India's principle of strategic autonomy and also suggest a comprehensive way forward. 15 marks, 150 words. Many of the students have been asking that how to basically look at the demand of the question. Now, in this question, there are primarily three demands you'll have to cater. First is an elaboration of the statement that in an increasingly polarized world, India's pursuit of strategic autonomy has undergone significant evolution. Talk about the evolution aspect. Second is the aspect of the challenges faced. What are the challenges being faced? And third is the comprehensive way forward. Make sure that the answer is proportionate. You give importance to each of these demands. Please write an answer to this question. Also, we have had a previous year question which talked about, in one way or the other, the aspects of strategic autonomy. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the fire safety crisis in India. Now, this is in the context of a particular incident, a very serious and tragic incident which has taken place in a club in Goa, where more than 25 people have been killed. They have been charred to death. Now, this is a very serious and grave situation. The reason being, in the last 1 decade, the number of incidents with respect to the fire accidents has been continuously increasing. Alongside the number of people who have been dying, it is also increasing. The sad part is that most of these incidents have taken place because of human negligence, because of non-adherence to the fire safety protocols. Even in this particular case, look at this. The club was operating without licenses and emergency exit doors. This is what the FIR says. So, and the other sad part with respect to this story is that out of the 25 people who have been killed, 20 were the staffers. They were the immigrants. They were the poor people from the states like Jharkhand and Bihar. So, you'll have to understand that this crisis is something which is a kind of a disaster. You must have heard about the fire accidents taking place in the hospitals. Many of the people and the infants have been killed in the hospitals. Hospital, which is a place where people go to secure their health, they are not even safe. So this is a very serious public health issue, a very important component of GS2, public health, and also GS3, disaster management. Let's talk about the gravity of this particular issue. According to the Accidental Death and Suicides in India report by the National Crime Records Bureau, what it says is that in the year 2022, there were more than 7,500 fire incidents reported across India. And in these incidents, almost 7,435 people were killed, primarily because of the human negligence. That is the gravity of the situation. Now, when we look at the legal aspect of this, what you'll have to understand is that the fire service is a state subject. And most of the states have devolved this to the municipalities as a municipal function, which even the 12th schedule, which is Article 243W, also talks about. So primarily, it is the responsibility of the municipalities when we talk about the fire services. I hope it is clear. This is a mention of the recent instances of or tragedies with respect to the fire accident cases. Now, let's go into the causes. That why do we have these, especially the urban areas, more prone to these fire accidents? The very first is urbanization and infrastructure issues. There are a lot of illegal constructions. Even in the legal constructions, the building codes are not adhered to. There are certain rules which are to be followed if you are building a particular construction. But what we have found is that in most of these cases, the rules are flouted. They are not adhered to. For example, there is a particular setback rule. What do you mean by setback rule? Let's say this is a particular property, right? The setback rule says that there has to be certain distance. And in this particular area, you can construct a building. You'll have to leave certain distance. That is what the setback rule is all about. But you must have seen in the narrow lanes of Delhi, is any kind of setback rule followed? No. So this leaves very small space for the fire services to enter. If there is a fire incident, the rescue and rehabilitation efforts, they cannot take place because of the narrow lanes. So the rules are flouted. Then we have the excessive use of non-fire resistant materials. Whenever we are constructing a building, there are certain protocols which have to be followed. According to the National Building Code, you need to use those items, those construction materials, which are not fire prone. But excessive usage of those items, the paints, the varnishes, they are more prone to the fire. Next, we have the poor urban planning. As I said, there are congested and narrow lanes, which leave very small space for these fire services to enter and rescue the people. As I said, that we have the National Building Code, which basically comes with its own set of rules and regulations, the protocols, which are to be followed when we talk about the building, the construction items, or what has to be different rules with respect to the construction of the building, the stairways. So we have the NBC 2016, which primarily says that there has to be the mandatory presence of 2 staircases. But in most of these clubs or in the hospitals where fire has taken place, what was found was that there was just one particular exit. There was just one staircase. So this itself increases the casualty. Then we have the governance challenges. See, there are political interferences. Why? As soon as the elections are about to come, we have a lot of these political parties who are forming the government, who are at the government. What they do is they regularize a lot of these illegal settlements. They say that we are going to regularize these slums or other areas. Now, these are the areas which are first of all illegal, and they do not even adhere to the basic minimum requirement with respect to the fire protocols. So that obviously increases the chances of these incidents, right? Lack of awareness. People are not really aware. Whenever you must have seen recently when the Operation Sindoor was being conducted, we had this, before that, there was this particular notification by the Ministry of Home Affairs with respect to the drill aspect. People do not take these drills seriously. They ignore the fire drills. And as a result, whenever such instances take place, they are not even aware of what to do, the precautionary steps or the primary steps which they should take if in an event fire occurs. Illegal factories. In many of the establishment, if you'll go in the narrow lanes of Delhi, I'm talking about the urban spaces, what you'll find is in many of the homes, in the basement or in the staircases or in the stairwells, factories have small factories. They have been established and they are using those hazardous chemicals. They are using the heat sources, the cylinders, the gas cylinders. And you have at the same time the children and the other family members also living there. So this is again a very grave threat, right? Obviously, without any permits. Then we have industrial and commercial oversights. What you'll have to understand is that in most of these places of the commercial origin, the clubs or the hospitals, they use different machineries, the refrigeration or the big, the supply arrangements with respect to the air conditioners. And these equipments, they're not properly maintained. They're not being properly serviced. As a result, the heat discharge from these equipments, it increases. And that is one of the leading causes of these incidents because that aggravates the fire. That intensifies the fire, the intensity of the fire in that particular location, right? In many of the cases, what we also find is the HVAC load. What do we mean by HVAC? We have the heating, ventilation and air conditioning, HVAC. So you must have seen that in the days of extreme heat, we have had a lot of instances where the compressors have burst. The compressors with respect to the air conditioners. And that obviously leads to more chances of fire. Then we have unsafe handling of hazardous materials. In many of the industrial locations or even hospitals, we have flammable materials in the form of, let's talk about the sanitizers. Let's talk about the cotton bed sheets. We have these flammable materials and they are not being properly stored. They're being stored in a very negligent manner, right? Then we have climate-driven threats. Because of the severe heats, which has been aggravated by the climate change. You must have heard about the urban heat islands. What happens? That the average temperature in the particular area, the urban area, because of the grey infrastructure, the average temperature is more than the surrounding areas. And that in one way or the other, it is a kind of a feedback mechanism with respect to the fires, right? Now, what are the key fire safety regulations in India? You just can go through this. We have the National Building Code. It was instituted with respect to the BIS, Bureau of Indian Standards, in 1970. And the third edition was released in 2016. This is the primary standard for the fire safety regulation norms in the country, where many of the states, we have the National Building Code, they have incorporated in their local bylaws. And the buildings, whatever construction is taking place, they have to adhere to the National Building Code. I hope it is clear. Then we have the Model Building Bylaws, use of fire-resistant material for construction, installation of fire alarms, detection systems. They basically talk about this. It's a model bylaws, right? Where different states must basically adopt these principles. Then we have Fire Prevention and Fire Safety Act. Now, this is not a common act at the central level. We have different states who have come up with these acts. Fire Prevention and Fire Safety Act. For example, UP has its own act. Madhya Pradesh has its own act, which talk about the fire safety in the buildings and must be upheld by all the states. So all states must basically follow this and make sure that the kind of regulations which are there, they must be enforced on the grounds. Then we have model bill to provide the maintenance of fire and emergency services for the state of 2019. Then this is important, scheme for the expansion and modernization of fire services in the states of 2023. The Finance Commission, the 15th Finance Commission, it recommended the allocation of around 5,000 crores to different states for strengthening the fire services. And this service was basically, the center came up with this particular service, the scheme, in order to realize this particular aspect of Finance Commission. Then we have the Fire Safety Week, Union Health Ministry. It celebrates the Fire Safety Week from 21st to 25th of April to raise awareness with respect to fire prevention and fire safety aspect. Then we have the NDMA guidelines. The NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, has come up with its own guidelines in order to prevent these fires. And if an instance occurs, how to basically manage that, the preparedness level with respect to the schools, homes and hospitals, right? What should be the way forward? Very important. The very first is there has to be adequate focus on the infrastructure modernization. We should now rather focus upon the smart infrastructure. Use the flame retardant materials. And how we can focus upon the smart infrastructure? By integrating the technology. Especially, see, we can't do it at the level of the homes, but at least for the commercial buildings, we can install these AI detectors, smart detectors, which can basically tell us what is the case or what is the chance of a particular fire incident which can take place in a particular building, right? Then we have retractable stairs. Those staircases which are easily foldable, they need to be made an integral part of these buildings. Then retrofitting the flame retardant materials in the form of flame resistant paints or insulators. They can be very easily used, or the coatings, right? Next, we have overhauling the firefighting. We have these firefighters. They do not have even basic minimum personal protective equipments, the breathers. So they need to be given these equipments so that they can effectively deal with any of the fire incident. Then we have the safe industrial practices. We need to phase out the hazardous material. Or if it is very important with respect to the industry, then there has to be proper adequate storage of that particular material, right? Or there has to be proper pipelines which are protected with respect to the fires. Then we have climate resilience. Why not develop the green belts, which can basically act as fire breaks, right? Whenever an instance of fire occurs. Then we have water recycling systems. In every of the society, in every of the residential area, there has to be a particular location which the fire services can basically use as a water recycling system, because once a lot of the water gets finished, it takes a lot of time for the other vehicle to come, right? So therefore, there has to be the adequate provision of water for these fire services. Then we have predictive analysis. Again, usage of technology in order to predict, right? And we can also basically come up with those steps which basically deter the formation of urban heat islands, green belts, as I already told you. So this is something which has become a public health crisis, and it's primarily because of the human negligence. So if we follow, see, the laws are in the letter but not in spirit. So you'll have to follow these laws and bylaws in letter and spirit. That is what you'll have to understand, because there is a kind of a nexus at the ground level between these local authorities and the real estate agents or the owners of these buildings. And therefore, whenever a particular fire incident occurs, there's a kind of a blame game which starts, and ultimately the lives of the people is lost. So what we'll have to focus upon is making sure that what all rules and regulations we have, they are followed in letter and spirit. Let's have a very simple question. It's India has been witnessing increasing number of fire accidents lately. Discuss the causes and suggest a way forward for handling the crisis effectively. 10 marks from 50 words. Please do write an answer to this question. Let's go to the next section. Coming to the very first topic of the simplified section, it is with respect to the draft Indian Statistical Institute Bill of 2025. Let's look at the gist of the article. See, we have the Indian Statistical Institute, which right now is registered as a society under the Societies Registration Act of 1860. So it enjoys its own ambit of autonomy with respect to the functioning, with respect to the governance, appointment. Recently, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation came up with a particular draft, that is the draft ISI Bill, which tries to give it a statutory basis to the ISI and makes a lot of changes with respect to the functioning, the governance and the appointment. So a lot of academicians and a lot of critics, what they have said is that this particular bill is trying to erode the autonomy of ISI. It has a lot of provisions which would significantly erode the functioning of ISI as a body, and the government would have ultimate control over the functioning of the body, which ideally should not occur. So this is the overall gist. We'll go through this. The draft Indian Statistical Institute Bill of 2025 has met with a lot of protests by the academicians as well as the students of the ISI, who claim that the move is aimed to strip the institute of its academic autonomy by converting it from a registered society to a statutory body corporate. See, most of the bodies who are registered as a society, most of those organizations, research institutes, who are registered as a society under the Societies Registration Act of 1860, they have their own ambit of autonomy. But if you are giving it a statutory status, and then if you're determining how the governance and the functioning and the appointments would take place, definitely that would compromise the autonomy of the body. What is the significance of the ISI? The ISI was founded in December 1931 by P.C. Mahalanobis in Kolkata. So this is the information which can be really important for you from the prelims aspect, right? Very important. And therefore, the centenary year is also going to come in 2031 and has since grown in one of India's most prestigious academic and research institutions. The institute was originally registered in April 1932 under the Societies Registration Act of 1860 and later re-registered under the West Bengal Societies Registration Act of 1961. Being a society provided the institute its own memorandum of association, bylaws, regulations. So it enjoyed its own set of autonomy. That is what the article is trying to convey. Parliament enacted the Indian Statistical Institute Act of 1959, declaring the ISI as institution of national importance. So ISI is an institution of national importance, do remember. Scholars link the origin of the institute to Bengal's Renaissance and credit the institute with shaping India's planning and policy apparatus. Very important. The National Sample Survey Organization was developed at the ISI, establishing the foundation of India's official statistical system. ISI offers different courses, undergraduate and postgraduate. The primary concern of those protesting the bill or opposing the draft bill is how ISI's institutional status will change from a registered society to that of a statutory body corporate. A recent letter signed by more than 1,500 academicians to the Minister of State Independent Charge of MOSPI, which is the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, stated that there is no transparent reason. The government has not provided any particular reason, any robust reason that MOSP should repeal the 1959 Act, abolish the society and introduce a bill which violates the basic spirit of the agreement between the general body of the society and the government. Because now the functions, according to the bill, would be transferred to the government. There would be a dominance of the government. So what these academicians have been asking the government is that what is the reason that you are converting this society into this kind of body, right? The letter also states that the move to bypass a society registered under the West Bengal Societies Registration Act to a statutory body corporate infringes upon the jurisdiction of the Societies Registration Act, and it's again the spirit of cooperative federalism. Because initially it was registered as a kind of a society under Society Registration Act of 1860. Then it was registered as a society under the West Bengal Societies Registration Act. So this is an element of the state and you are now compromising it. Those opposing the draft bill point out that the governance structure, as in the 1959 Act, vested authority in the council with academic representation and procedural safeguards against the government overreach. So initially when we talk about the governance structure, there was a dominance of the academicians. They used to take the decision with respect to the functioning of the institute. The proposed 2025 bill gives power to the Board of Governors defined under Section 15 of the Act, which is heavily dominated by the government nominees, sidelining the authority of the faculty and academic stakeholders. So what these people are saying is that initially we had the say with respect to the governance, the academicians, the faculty members, but now you are coming up with a Board of Governors, which would be invariably dominated by the government people. So that would obviously affect the autonomy of the institution. Former professor of ISI said that the ISI is a place of doing basic research, which is a long-term process where the immediate results may not be visible. Since there is a push for a corporate model of funding in the bill, getting funds for basic research projects could be a problem in the future, right? Section 29 of the proposed act deals with the power to generate revenue, which includes student fees, consultancy services, and sponsored research projects. So what many of the students have been saying is, because of this particular bill, if it gets the ratification, the fees would also be enhanced. That would compromise the interest of the students from the weaker sections, right? Another critical area raised by those opposing the bill is that all appointments will be controlled by the union government through the Board of Governors. Earlier, there were 10 representatives from the ISI out of the 33 representatives, now there will be none. So at least previously they had some form of participation with respect to the appointment. Now there would be no one, right, from the institute. There are apprehensions of political interference in the appointments. The idea behind the legislation, what the government is saying is the vision to make ISI not only one of the best in India, but also one of the foremost institutions in the world as the institute approaches the centenary year in 2031. It completes 100 years in 2031. 4 review committees had examined the functioning of the ISI. The most recent, chaired by Dr. R.A. Mashelkar in 2020, recommended major reforms to strengthen the governance, expand the academic programs, and make ISI globally competitive. This is what the reasoning of the government is. But if we look at the facts of the case, what we will see is definitely it would compromise the autonomy of the body. What lies ahead? The students and the academicians are banking on the support of the opposition parties to oppose the proposed legislation. Now, let's also talk about the framework with respect to statistics in the country. We have the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. It was formed way back in the 1999 with the merger of 2 departments. The first was Department of Statistics, second Department of Program Implementation. The 2 wings comprise of Statistics Wing and the Program Implementation. The Program Implementation Wing of the MOSPI oversees the Member of Parliament Local Area Development Scheme and the 20-point program, TPP, and the infrastructure monitoring. National Statistical Office, formation in 2019 as an umbrella body. This includes the CSO, Central Statistical Organization, and the National Sample Survey Organization. Previously, they were different. Now, they have been clubbed together, merged as a single body, which is the National Statistical Office. Manages the Gross Domestic Product, Index of Industrial Production, Consumer Price Index, and the Annual Survey of Industries. The NSSO, now we were talking about the Central Statistical Office. The NSSO conducts the socio-economic surveys as it is a survey organization, including the Periodic Labor Force Survey, Consumer Expenditure and Health, National Statistical Commission, primarily to give advice. Constituted in 2006 based on the recommendations of Rangarajan Commission, ensures professional oversight, quality assurance, and other protocols. Then we have the state directorates. The Directorate of Economics and Statistics in different states handle the local data collection, follow the NSO formats and survey protocols. What is the legal framework with respect to the surveys and the statistics? We have the Union List of Entry 94, which allows the center to collect statistics on union subjects. Concurrent List Entry of 45 empowers both center and states to handle the general statistics. Relevance Act, we have the Census Act with the Registration of Births and Death Act, Statistics Act of 2008. Institutional status, the ISI. The ISI functions as an autonomous institution under the MOSPI as per the ISI Act of 1959. But if the bill gets passed, then the autonomy would be significantly affected. UN integration, the NSO aligns with the IMF SDDS, which is the Special Data Dissemination Standard with respect to the IMF and the UN release standards. Now let's look at this. The NSO, National Statistical Office, comes under the MOSPI. It's the umbrella body, oversees the national statistics, surveys, and data release. Then we have the Central Statistical Office, comes under the NSO, right? So it basically talks about the GDP, the IIP, the CPI, the Annual Survey of Industries. NSSO, it's a survey. It also comes under the NSO, National Statistical Office, conducts large-scale socio-economic survey. Then we have the National Statistical Commission. So this is an advisory body. Then we have the Indian Statistical Institute. It's again, you'll have to see, as of now it's autonomous, but this can hamper, the autonomy can be hampered if the bill gets ratification. Then we have the Directorate of the Statistics in different states. Then we have the Program Implementation Wing with respect to the MOSPI. It monitors the major projects like the MPLEDS, Member of Parliament Local Area Development Scheme. Remember, this is important. The MPLED scheme is being implemented by MOSPI, where you have a Program Implementation Wing, right? I hope this is clear. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to surveillance apps and welfare. Snake oil for accountability. Snake oil means what? That you are using a particular substance as a remedy, but in effect, it has no usage, right? Now, what the author is trying to say in this particular article, that the government has basically integrated technology in many of its programs. For example, MG and REGA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Then it has integrated technology with respect to the nutrition programs in Poshan Tracker or Anganwadi workers, functioning of the Anganwadi system. What the government has been saying is that we have 2 objectives. The very first objective is to make sure that the workers who are basically handling these programs, they do their task effectively. There is the accountability which is maintained. Second, there is no pilferage of resources. Resources must not be lost in the whole process. The beneficiaries who are entitled to these resources must get these resources. That is what the government is saying. But what the author is saying in this particular article is that it is failing to basically realize these objectives. Instead, what is happening is the workers who are basically working in these programs, they are using different means to dodge the system. And this is in a way incentivizing those workers who are fooling the system and those workers who are really serious about the work rather than these biometric things. They are being penalized. So that is what you'll have to understand. Now, in such type of article, what is really important is the analysis portion is very less. But you can use these things as cases, as case study in your answer. So we'll go through them. A growing trend. The government systems increasingly rely on photographs, videos, biometrics, and apps for worker accountability. You must have seen those doctors who are posted in rural areas. They have to mandatorily register themselves on the FRT apps, facial recognition technology apps. Now, what the doctors are doing is they're coming up. See, again, that is the very objective is to make sure the doctors come in the rural locations and serve the people. But they are, trying and coming up with their own solutions. And ultimately, the service delivery at the grassroots, it is being compromised. From cleaners to nurses to Anganwadi workers, frontline staff are monitored through digital tools. However, these mechanisms fail to improve the actual work quality and in many cases, worsen the corruption or exclusion. In fact, it is leading to corruption and exclusion. The biometric turn, how? The cases. When attendance overshadows the work, government attempted to fix the absenteeism by introducing the biometric attendance system. You must have seen in different workplaces, we have the biometric attendance system in order to make sure that the absenteeism is reduced. Many employees have shifted their priority from completing work to merely clocking in time. So for them, the priority is not the work now. The priority is to make sure that they enter at the correct time and leave at the correct time, right? So the focus has shifted. A randomized control trial in Rajasthan showed that the biometric attendance did not reduce absenteeism among the government nurses. In fact, attendance worsened in the long run. The key issue is technology monitored presence, not performance. You are monitoring, you are measuring the presence, not performance, right? Important words can be used in the answers. MGN RGA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and the National Mobile Monitoring System apps. Old corruption, new tools. The MGN REGA faces chronic inflation of attendance to siphon wages. In 2022, the National Mobile Monitoring System required workers' photos to be updated twice daily. That was made mandatory. Yet, corruption is persisting. Random or irrelevant photos are being updated. Then we have photos of photos, JPEG manipulations, proxy attendance through digital loopholes. A 2025 circular from the Ministry of Rural Development identified 7 major malpractices showing that fudged photos simply replace the fudged signatures. So, the systems are only capable of making sure that the people are uploading those pictures, but they're not capable of verifying it. And therefore, the fudging is taking place. Then we have the portion tracker and facial recognition, exclusion and inefficiency. The Ministry of Women and Child Development mandated the facial recognition technology for take-home rations. The idea was to ensure the mothers and children receive the rations. The reality is connectivity issues, app glitches, and crowd made the process even more difficult. Cheating persisted because FRT does not prevent a denial of rations after authentication. So cheating is still there. And in fact, even those people who ideally should receive the benefits, they are being denied the benefits. This mirrors earlier problems with the Aadhaar-based biometric authentication in the public distribution system. Elderly or disabled beneficiaries could not send proxies. Many were excluded due to authentication failures. Some ration dealers used the Aadhaar-based biometric authentication to cheat beneficiaries by giving them less than their quotas. So you have integrated technology, but how the technology is being used? There are cases where technology is proving to be inefficient, ineffective in curbing the kind of objectives in curbing those loopholes which you had initially thought of. Surveillance apps and sincere workers, perverse incentives. Field level health workers face constant digital surveillance. The auxiliary nurse midwife must upload the photos of breastfeeding, counseling or home visits. So this is intruding in someone's privacy. That is what you'll have to understand. A genuine visit without a photo is counted as not done, but a fake photo uploaded, it gets the pass, the green signal. A worker in Andhra Pradesh received a show cause notice because poor connectivity forced her to move 300 meters to log a visit, flagged as fraudulent. So even when the people are working, you are saying that they're not working. And even when those people are not even working, you are giving them the green pass. Outcome, genuine workers feel demoralized while dishonest ones learn to game the system. Limits of the technological fixes, accountability without responsibility. John Rees and Amartya Sen argue for moving from accountability, compliance with instructions, to responsibility, intrinsic motivation to serve the public interest. What the tech fixes can enforce the minimal compliance but cannot create responsibility or improve work culture. You cannot force someone to work in a social sphere, right? If the person doesn't want to work, definitely you cannot force it, and cannot explain why many workers remain sincere despite weak accountability. Agnotology, there is a study of ignorance, cultivated ignorance of tech failures. Despite evidence of failures, the government continues pushing more digital surveillance. Examples: National Mobile Monitoring System, misuse acknowledged, yet the response was a directive for 100% photograph verification. So you're not rectifying the system, rather you are enforcing it without even analyzing that what are the issues involved. Even amid the NMMS's failure, the FRT was mandated for nutrition programs, facial recognition technology. The article invokes the agnotology, right? Now, this is a term which was given by Robert Proctor, which is the study of ignorance, right? The intentional production of ignorance, vested interests of tech companies. See, again, there is the money which is involved. The tech companies, they get funds from the government, and government gives the tender. So there is a nexus which is involved there, right? You cannot simply say that there would be no tech company involvement or no tech company. Creation of large markets for devices, servers, authentication. Yes, you are creating market for each of the every hardware which you are using, even the telecom companies. Willful blindness to exclusion, inefficiency, and privacy violations. The important things, they are being ignored. What should be the conclusion? The article concludes that digital monitoring tools fail to stop the corruption, cause exclusion of vulnerable groups, especially the elderly, the SCs, STs, marginalized, slow down the welfare delivery because the process is stopped, right? Violate the privacy, demotivate the honest workers. These are the negatives which you can cite whenever you're talking about the technological integration in the governance system. Rather than over-relying on technology, India needs systemic reforms, comprehensive reforms, better staffing, transparent processes, supportive work environment, especially for the female workers, right? ASHA workers, the auxiliary nurse, midwives, Anganwadi workers, and a shift from coercive, the forceful environment, accountability, to that of public service responsibility. This should be the phrase which should be used in your answers. I hope it is clear. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the National Intelligence Grid. This is gaining traction as it is being used widely for securing information, right? So the National Intelligence Grid, a platform for the police and investigating agencies to securely access the government as well as the private databases in real time, is getting around 45,000 requests a month. The platform, accessible only to security agencies, became operational last year after being first conceptualized in 2019 in the aftermath of 26/11 Mumbai attacks. The Union Home Ministry has asked the state to liberally use the platform to access the datasets. Please note that there can be a statement in the prelims that for what purpose the NATGRID is being used. To access the datasets, which include the details of driving license, Aadhaar registration, airline data, bank records, and also the details of social media accounts which share posts on a particular issue. Access to NATGRID is now available to Superintendent of Police rank officers. Earlier, it was only meant to be accessible to 10 central agencies such as the Intelligence Bureau (IB), Raw Research and Analysis Wing, the National Investigation Agency (NIA), Enforcement Directorate, Financial Intelligence Unit (FIU), Narcotics Control Bureau, and the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence. An official said that logging onto the portal required a lot of time, while another official said that he had to wait. They had to wait longer to get the desired information, even though the platform is supposed to provide real-time data. So there are issues with the functions with the platform, but they would be rectified. The platform, which had been in the works for almost a decade, was first envisaged under the Congress leader P. Chidambaram, received a fresh momentum under Home Minister Amit Shah in 2019. Under Mr. Shah, the differences between various security agencies were ironed out, and the application was made accessible even to the state police. Previously, only investigative agencies had the access to the information. Now, even the state police has. The government is taking steps to enhance security and maintain sanctity of data in the wake of repeated cyber attacks attempts on critical infrastructure in the country. Critical infrastructure means the railway lines, the power lines, the nuclear setup, right? In 2024, India witnessed over 20.41 lakh cyber security related incidents. Use this data. That is how you use the data in the answers. The highest number of incidents since 2020. Now, there's one thing which many of the aspirants are confused about. See, we have a lot of bodies which are constitutional and they enjoy the autonomy, but still they fall under a particular ministry because the routing of the funds takes place from a particular ministry, right? So please understand that. We have, for example, the Finance Commission. It's under the Ministry of Finance. We have CIA, Central not CIA, sorry, Central Information Commission under Ministry of Personnel, Central Administrative Tribunal, Ministry of Personnel, UPSC, Ministry of Personnel, SSC, again Ministry of Personnel, Central Vigilance Commission, Ministry of Personnel, CBI, right? It falls under the Ministry of Personnel. Do remember. Interstate Council, Zonal Councils, NIA and NHRC, they come in Home Affairs. Then we have Commissioner for Linguistic Minorities, Commissioner for the Minorities, again both of them come in the Minority Affairs Ministry. Then we have the National Commission for the Scheduled Castes, Backward Classes, Disabled Persons, they come under the Social Justice and Empowerment. Then we have the National Commission for the Protection of Child Rights, Ministry of Women and Child Development, Central Social Welfare Board, Ministry of Women and Child Development, National Commission for Women, the same, Ministry of Women and Child Development. For the STs, it comes under Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Northeastern Council under Ministry of Development of Northeastern Region. Do remember these ministries because they can be directly asked in the UPSC prelims. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to natural farming. So we have the Director General of the Indian Council of Agriculture Research. He has said to the Vice Chancellors of different central and state agriculture universities to come up with these courses which involve the aspects of natural farming. The Indian Council of Agriculture Research Director General Amil Jat has written to the Vice Chancellors of all the state and central agriculture universities as well as universities with agriculture departments, urging them to launch the undergraduate and postgraduate courses on natural farming. It is gaining attraction. Natural farming had emerged as a subject of national importance aligned with India's strategic priorities for sustainable agriculture and farmers' welfare. Given the expanding national demand for chemical-free food systems, resilient agrosystems, soil health restoration and low emission farming, it was imperative. These are the benefits or the attributes of natural farming. Use these words. That is chemical free agriculture, then we have resilient agro ecosystems, then we have the health restoration of the soils, and then we have low emission farming. It was imperative that the state agriculture universities, deemed universities and central agricultural universities develop the postgraduate programs in natural farming and allied domains. Let's talk about the natural farming. So we have the natural farming. It's a chemical-free traditional farming method that relies on minimal external inputs, primarily in the form of the chemical inputs, and emphasizes on sustainability. It is considered as an agroecology-based diversified farming systems. According to the ecology of the region, you are planting the crops. You are not forcing those crops on the soil which are not suited for that particular region. For example, rice requires a lot of water, but you are using in the dry and the semi-arid portions of the western India. So obviously, it is not according to the agroecological zonation, which integrates crops, trees and livestock with functional biodiversity. It is largely based on on-farm biomass recycling with major stress on biomass mulching, use of on-farm cow dung urine formulations, maintaining soil aerations, so that the proper air can flow into the soil, exclusion of all the synthetic chemical inputs. It is gaining popularity in India due to the reduced cost, improved soil health and eco-friendly practices. It has many indigenous forms in India. Zero budget natural farming. It is one of the forms of natural farming. That is what we'll have to understand. Please tell me the name of the person who basically came up with this concept of zero budget natural farming. The most popular one is practiced in Andhra Pradesh called zero budget natural farming. We have some of the core elements of zero budget natural farming. We have, for example, Jeevamrit, which is the process of enhancing the fertility of soil using the cow urine, dung, floor of pulses and jaggery concoction, the mixture. Mulching, the process involves creating microclimate using different mulches with trees, crops. You cover the whole soil so that it retains the moisture. Plant productions, the process involves spraying biological concoctions, prevents pests, diseases, weed problems and protects the plants and improves the soil fertility. Vapsa, the process involves activating the earthworms in the soil because they are the friends of the farmers, right? And they maintain the soil fertility in order to create water vapor condensation. Bijamrit, the process includes treatment of seeds using cow dung, urine, lime-based formulations. This is what you need to know with respect to natural farming. Possibly a question in the prelims can come. Let's go to the last article. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to the intangible cultural heritage. So we have the 20th session of the Intergovernmental Committee for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage of the UNESCO. This would take place at the Red Fort from 8th of December till 13th of December. We have had the External Affairs Minister who has given an address to this particular meeting. In his address at the opening ceremony of a UNESCO meeting on safeguarding the intangible cultural heritage at the Red Fort complex. So Mr. Jaishankar, he outlined that India, besides becoming home to many UNESCO World Heritage Sites, has itself taken many preservation and conservation projects across the world. A key dimension that engagement is preservation of intangible heritage. Let's see what is intangible cultural heritage. The term cultural heritage, I have taken this snippet from the website itself, so it's an authentic information. The term cultural heritage has changed content considerably in the recent decades, partially owing to the instruments developed by the UNESCO. Cultural heritage does not end at the monuments and collections of objects. That is what the tangible aspect is, which you can touch, which you can feel. But intangible is something which you can only feel, right? It also includes traditions or living expressions inherited from our ancestors and passed on to our descendants, such as oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature or the universe, or knowledge and skills to produce traditional crafts. These are intangible assets. That is what you'll have to understand. The importance of intangible cultural heritage is not the cultural manifestation itself, but rather the wealth of knowledge and the skills that is transmitted from one generation to the other. The social and economic value of this transmission of knowledge is relevant for minority groups and for mainstream social groups within a state, and is important for developing states as for the developed states. What kind of intangible assets we have? The UNESCO's 2003 conventions, the convention with respect to intangible cultural heritage that came up in 2003. The 2003 Convention for Safeguarding the Intangible Cultural Heritage proposes 5 broad domains, areas, in which intangible cultural heritage is manifested. We have the oral traditions and expressions, performing arts, social practices, knowledge and practices, tradition, craftsmanship. Let's talk about India. Now, here's a mention of the intangible cultural heritage which are recognized by the UNESCO with respect to India. We have traditional Vedic chanting, Ram Leela, the traditional performance of Ramayana, Kutiyattam, Sanskrit theatre, Ramam, which is religious festival and ritual theatre of Garhwal Himalayas. Then we have Mudiyattu, which is the theatre, ritual theatre and dance and drama of Kerala. All these are very important. They have been asked in one form or the other in the prelims. Then we have Kalbelia, folk songs and dances of Rajasthan, Chahu dance, primarily from the state of Jharkhand, Buddhist chanting of Ladakh, recitation of sacred Buddhist texts in the Trans-Himalayan Ladakh region, Sankirtana, ritual singing and drumming and dancing of Manipur, Yoga, Nowruz, Kumbh Mela, Durga Puja in Kolkata, and Garba of Gujarat. Remember these because there can be a particular question in the UPSC. Very, very important. Which are the intangible cultural heritage with respect to India recognized by UNESCO? That is what you'll have to understand. That is from my side. I hope you really enjoyed the session. All the very best. Thank you so much.